My name is Vickie Barker, and I'm from Palermo, California at this time, and I'm here to address some issues that are on the hearts of many people. And I think judicial corruption, government corruption is probably the most rampant here in the United States. And I think it's time that our elected officials start listening to the voice of the people, start understanding what's truly happening at the home level. We have people now that are suffering through things like the child services protection that are just ripping families apart. I myself have grandchildren I've never met because of some of this corruption that took place 12 years ago. I know of families that have their children missing for 12 years now that have no idea how to get in touch with them and by law are not allowed to. And I think it's time that Congress and the senators take a step back and start looking at the effects of some of the legislative intent that's being drawn up out there and really following it down to see how it gets into the homes of the people. So what we're hoping is that Congress, the people that are elected officials as a voice of the people, start actually listening to the people and understand that some of these laws that are being made have gotten out of hand, especially when you factor in the fact that we've got corruption at all levels. So we can't feel that we live in a free America if we've got people over here that are taking money and bribes in one hand. We've got lobbyists that are paying for issues that the people are very clearly stating they don't want, but yet the money talks louder than the words. And so it's really time for people that are in office now to stand up and say, okay, I've been an elected official. This is what I need to do. We have to be above reproach when we're in these sorts of offices, and this is what's missing in this country. No one is above reproach. Judges, they don't feel like they should be accountable to anyone. And I think the judicial accountability is something that really does need to be investigated at every level. Don't think because you're a family in a different area that it's not going to affect you in some way, because it will eventually affect you. We're seeing very upstanding citizens in communities taken down by the corruption. We see people losing their homes. This is one of the factors that I think people are really missing, is because unless it touches your life, you don't know. And these elected officials, it's time that they really take a look at what's going on and seeing in the chain of events what they're causing people. We have attorneys out there that are on both sides of the fence. I see judges all the time making judgment. Now, when they became a judge, first they were a prosecutor. It's very hard for those people, those judges, to change their colors. They're not coming into a free society looking at both sides of the law. They're making a preconceived judgment based on their past experience of being a prosecutor. So this judge is once a prosecutor, always a prosecutor. People need to take that into account when they're getting their court cases set up. Start looking at what judge is going to be writing on your case, which one's going to oversee that case. Because that judge, if he's always been a prosecutor and maybe 2, 6, 7 years down before became a judge, that man's still looking at you as either a victim or a criminal. There's no in between. And so these are the things that are really tying people up in courts, and they're losing their cases because there's no credibility throughout the judges. They're not accountable to anyone. And this is what we found in a home foreclosure here recently, is why I'm in California. This is not my choice of states to be. I would rather be back in Idaho. But because I came to the call of my sister, who was losing our family home of over 100 years, when I came to California, I was really angry with her, because this was my youngest sister, and all of a sudden I got word that the bank was taking our property that we grew up on for over 100 years. It's been in the family. And I was angry about it, thinking, well, you know, how irresponsible. So when I came down to California and started visiting with her, I said, well, you know, we talked on the phone, and all these things that should have been done, you know, weren't done, so you lost the place. And she said, well, I did these things. I tried to get a modification. I did everything that they were telling me to do, but they took the place anyway. So as I start sitting there, I said, well, what did you tell the bank? I start reading this stuff and recognizing the fact that the whole case of them, they basically frauded her on the whole loan and took the property. So without having an attorney, we didn't have an attorney, and this is something else that I think Congress and those in charge need to realize. When you're in a situation like this, you're losing your home, you go before the judge and he says, get an attorney. All well and good. You can't find an attorney that'll take a case for less than $20,000, or you can't find an attorney that has not already been approached and is defending the plaintiff. So, you know, you've got they can't do that. Conflict of interest, so they can't take your case. So you end up trying to defend yourself, and you go and you learn the laws, you put the cases together, you present the facts, you present the case law, and lo and behold, you have a judge up there that pretty much just mocks you in his own court for even trying to get the story across, to try to explain what happened. And that's something that's truly missing in the entire judicial system, is that there's no one there to represent the people in those kind of times. If a person had $20,000 to go and pay a lawyer, you'd have had $20,000 to pay to save your home probably. You know, there's no logic. And this is what I beg Congress to do, is somehow get back to a little bit of common sense and logic when all these rules and regulations are being made, because you're totally defying the whole intent of legislation in our government in the first place. So what we ended up finding out is, as we started going through, you know, I've been around the law. I used to work for the government, so I was an executive manager for the Department of Human Resources. So I knew how to read policy, regulations, and rules. I knew how to get into those books. I wasn't real familiar with the legalities and the procedure of law, but my sister and I spent hours, days, and months in law libraries, digging through books, trying to find out, okay, what do you do next? What do you do next? And so throughout that entire process, what we found was there was something going on with the banks. The banks had predetermined what they were going to do way back before she ever got a foreclosure notice. Banks set a precedence of how they were going to do business. So we found that. We started uncovering more than I ever wanted to know about what had happened through these home foreclosures. In all of our investigations, we started relating what the intent of the legislature was when they wrote the law and how the procedure was supposed to be followed. And so we brought that up to the judge. We exposed every bit of that, the fraud that these banks were actually pulling on the American people. And we're not talking about just our home. By this time now, I'm into the whole scope of the nation looking at cases. And I'm seeing case after case after case with the same scenario, the same robo-signers, the MERS Corporation, and how they move properties around without clear title. And I'm starting to recognize we have a bigger problem here than just us losing our old family farm. So we presented all this to the judge, realizing we live in a small community. I forget how many now. I think there was 264 homes at that time being foreclosed on in a county of Glenn that only has 23,000 people population. So that's over 200 homes being taken away from these people living there. And I grew up in there. So that hit home with me. So instead of being here 2 weeks in California, I've now been here 3 years, fighting this in court. Okay, every month in court. And we tried to give them every scenario. My sister tried for over a year almost a year, trying to get a modification on a loan. The banks wouldn't hear of a modification. They kept postponing it until the house sold at an auction. They kept intentionally postponing. And these are the things that we need to bring out to people, is to recognize that now, through the fights and what Lawless America is doing right now, there's nothing that's more important, I think, than right now. It's here now. The time is here now to expose these things, to get people to recognize that 6.6 million homes were foreclosed in an 18-month period. When you look at the size of the United States, you start recognizing this is a bigger picture. And then to have the audits be done, I know we've had some people that have been pushing for the Federal Reserve to be audited. They did a preliminary in July of 2011, and what they came back to find was that these banks outside of the United States even have been bought off. Deutsche Bank is the bank that ended up with our old family farm. Deutsche Bank got $367 billion in money. And this is a German bank. This is supposedly a small German bank. And it's people like Judge Peter Tweed, Peter Bilyeu Tweed is his name, Judge Peter Bilyeu Tweed, who sat on the case, who had every opportunity was given to that man to be fair and just and to take it into consideration, the law. That never happened. What eventually happened, to make a long story short, is the house then was put up for auction for highest bidder. His relative, Michael Joseph Bilyeu III, was the one that ended up with the property, the judge's own relative. What really started triggering us to recognize something was a little underhanded going on here was the fact that there was an attorney, Richard Harriman, that works for Glenn County. We thought he was just an attorney, and so we tried to hire him at one point, and he said, I can't take your case because I'm a private attorney. I work only for the county. So he works for the judge. At one point, as we were sitting there in our chairs trying to hold the house together and keep the eviction notices away, we had a visit from that one attorney. And my sister and I had a conversation at the time of how weird it was that this county attorney finally came to our old family farm. It was a little over 6 acres. It was no big thing. But he was not interested in anything about the house, the orchard, anything like that. His interest was on the waterway. Stony Creek is a major waterway that runs through there into the Sacramento River. The man walked down there, looked at the footage that bordered the water, and then he left. And, you know, I didn't understand why he'd come. He didn't bring anybody with him to look at it. They didn't do an assessment on the house. He just wanted to see where that piece of land was situated. And it was just kind of odd that in the end of all this, when it went up for auction, that it was his relative that ended up with the property who was the lowest bidder or the highest bidder at the auction. And so now he has full control of the old family farm. And the amazing thing is that people like this, like Judge Peter Bilyeu Tweed and like Michael Joseph Bilyeu III, the real problem is that evidently they wanted that property so bad that they would take it fraudulently, for one thing, in a small area where we all know each other. But the sad thing is that he's being allowed to go down there now with all of his mining equipment and cats, and he's totally changing the water flow of Stony Creek. And he's not being accountable to any of the water rights people because he's on the board. He's not being accountable to the Bureau of Land Management, the Corps of Engineers. All of those were set in place to protect that waterway, but yet because these guys are so powerful in a small county at the local level, they pretty much can come in there and totally destroy a natural ecosystem for all the animals and the creatures that live in that creek, because he wants to go down there and dig and take the gravel out. And that was never allowed. It's never been allowed to anybody living along the banks of the Stony Creek ever since I was a little kid, ever since my grandparents had it. They were never even allowed to go down and try to put structures in there to prevent water from eroding. But yet Michael Joseph Bilyeu III has all the rights in the world and goes over the top of the heads of all the federal government, the state agencies, and he can go down there and start digging with his little cat and have his playtime every day and moving millions of pounds of stones around in this little rock quarry that he's digging. And yet the judge, everyone turns their eyes. They don't see what's going on. And this is happening. The more you get into something, and I think some people, they don't really get a chance to learn what's truly going on because it's never affected them personally. And it's just, when I was in Idaho, I saw it from a different picture myself, even though I've been around corruption. In Idaho, I did a jail tour with Judicial Accountability Initiative. In fact, I got my mother's motorhome, and Don Harkin, who was the editor of the Idaho Observer, Ingrid Cassell, president of the Vac Lib organization. We had a couple of people that were legal representatives, and we made a tour, and we went to every county in Idaho, and we would set up, do a seminar, and we had some counties to where that when the word got out what we were doing, by the time we got to Twin Falls and that side of Idaho, we got word that the lady over there putting up the posters to tell everybody that the Judicial Accountability road trip was on their way and we were going to set up, they actually caught a judge without his robe on tearing the signs down himself personally from the telephone poles where people were putting them up. This is how bad they want to keep this all under wrap. And you watch this, we heard stories there of all sorts of things going on. And, and that affected me. And then but foreclosures, it never really come into mind that there was any fraud going on. I just figured people got their house, they couldn't pay their bills, and the bank took it back. What sounds simple to me. But we've left a bunch of records down in the car that we didn't bring up, and there's a ton of stuff at my sister's house that we didn't bring in. But when we got into this case, the enormous workload on the American family, and we've talked a lot about this throughout the groups I've worked with, there's something called legal abuse syndrome. And when families start getting into this, I've suffered it just since coming down here. Like I said, I didn't think it was a big deal. I just thought, well, they didn't pay their bill, so, and then, you know, the fiance died and he was helping, so they probably got behind. That's all it is. They lost the place. And they should have never financed it in the first place. And that was my attitude until I came down here and met with my sister and looked at what she had submitted. I looked at what the bank had told her. I looked at the enormous amount of phone logs she had of where she was trying to. We had family members calling saying, well, we'll help you make the payments. And she'd tell us, no, don't worry about that because they said they're going to do a modification. So there's nothing to worry about. We'll let the bank do it. Well, lo and behold, behind closed doors, they made all these decisions. And boom, all of a sudden, once they had the first sale, which was illegal, everything started snowballing. And there was no modification. It was just talk. She was told at one time she wanted to know, well, who carries the contract? She was told by IndyMac, who was the financing loan company, that, oh, well, we don't have it. It was sold to another bank. She said, well, how do I get a hold of that bank? Because I need to try to figure out how to make payments. Now Randall's dead. I need to make the payments. Well, it was sold to a bank. We can't tell you who they are, but they're a small German bank, is what she was told. The bank they were talking of was called Deutsche Bank. Anybody can look it up. The biggest bank in the entire world. This bank now has taken, of the bailout monies, have taken over $300 billion in bailout money, still collecting on these foreclosures homes, and people that are trying to fight to save their home, you're required to pay them rent while you're in the home trying to fight to save your own property, so they've collected all of those kind of funds. Small German bank, I'm sorry, they're not. But these are the things that we were being told at the time, and it's just, you know, it's easy to see how things are taken out of context. I don't know how many people I've talked to that I've said, oh, I'm down here, I've gone on an extended stay because my sister's losing the house to a foreclosure. Well, their attitude is, well, you know, well, they brought it on themselves. This isn't the case. This is not the case. And now with the auditing the Fed, once we understand where the money goes, even your tax dollars, people think that their tax dollars are going to be right here when they collect this money to fix your roads, fix your bridges, and all, and fix your kids' schools. That's not true. The money's taken outside of the United States. And this is showing up very well in the audits when they're doing the Federal Reserve audits. And need a break.